The evening of Friday, October 19, 2018, unfolded under a soft amber glow at the Golden Sunset restaurant, perched on the western edge of Blackstone, Georgia. The establishment sat along a quiet stretch of Highway 12, its wooden facade weathered by years of humid summers and gentle winters, yet its wide windows radiated warmth from the flickering lanterns within. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of fried chicken and sweet tea, mingling with the low hum of conversations from scattered patrons, locals winding down after a long week. Janice Wilson sat alone at a corner table near the back, her posture slightly hunched as she rested one hand on the curve of her 6-month pregnant belly. At 34, she carried an air of quiet resilience, her dark hair pulled into a loose bun, strands escaping to frame her face after a long day. She wore a simple burgundy dress that draped comfortably over her frame, the fabric chosen more for practicality than elegance, though it still caught the light in subtle ways. Her other hand fidgeted with the edge of a napkin, folding and unfolding it as she glanced toward the entrance every few minutes. She had arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes early, as was her habit, expecting Caleb to join her by 7 for what she had planned as a quiet celebration of their 10th wedding anniversary. The table was set for two, a small vase of wilted daisies drooping in the center, a detail she noticed but didn't bother to fix. Her anticipation had been building all day, a rare evening away from the paperwork and late-night calls that had defined their lives since the auto repair business took off. She had even left the house in a rush, forgetting her phone on the kitchen counter, trusting Caleb would find her here as promised. The clock above the bar ticked past 7:15, then 7:30, each minute stretching her patience thinner, though she chalked it up to his usual delays at the shop. By 7:45, the waitress, a wiry woman with graying hair and a name tag reading Doris, had stopped by twice, offering a sympathetic smile and a refill of water that Janice barely touched. The restaurant's front door swung open at 7:52 and Janice straightened, her breath catching as she recognized Caleb's broad silhouette against the twilight outside. He stepped inside, his work boots scuffing the hardwood floor, his navy jacket unzipped over a faded flannel shirt, a familiar sight after 10 years together. But he wasn't alone. A woman clung to his arm, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders in deliberate waves, her slim figure accentuated by a tight green sweater and jeans that hugged her hips. She looked no older than 25, her laughter cutting through the restaurant's murmur as she leaned into Caleb, oblivious to the stares that followed them. Janice's hand stilled on her belly, her pulse quickening as the pair approached her table, weaving past a family of 4 and an elderly couple nursing coffee. Caleb stopped a few feet away, his hazel eyes locking onto hers with a glint of defiance she hadn't seen before. He stood taller than usual, his 6-foot frame imposing in the dim light, his jaw set as if he'd rehearsed this moment. The blonde woman, later revealed as Ashley, shifted closer to him, her hand resting possessively on his elbow, her painted nails catching the lantern glow. Without hesitation, Caleb announced his intention, his voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of nearby tables. He declared that Ashley was his new partner, that he was leaving Janice for her, and that their marriage, the one Janice had poured a decade into, was over. The words landed like a physical blow, though Janice's face betrayed no immediate fracture. The restaurant hushed, forks pausing midair, heads turning as the weight of his statement settled over the room. Doris lingered near the counter, wiping the same spot repeatedly, her eyes darting between the trio. Janice sat motionless for a beat, her napkin crumpled in her fist, the air around her thick with unspoken tension. Then, slowly, she rose from her chair, her movements deliberate despite the tremor in her legs. Her belly pressed against the table's edge as she reached into her purse, retrieving a plain manila envelope she'd carried all day, not for this, but for something else entirely. She placed it on the table with a soft thud, the sound swallowed by the silence that had overtaken the room. Caleb's brow furrowed, his confidence faltering as he eyed the envelope, its contents a mystery he hadn't anticipated. Ashley tilted her head, her smirk fading into uncertainty, sensing a shift she couldn't name. Janice didn't linger to explain. She turned, her dress swishing faintly as she walked toward the exit, her shoulders squared against the weight of every gaze following her. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the cool night air hitting her face as she stepped onto the gravel lot. Behind her, Caleb remained rooted, his hand still on Ashley's arm, though his eyes stayed fixed on the envelope, a seed of doubt sprouting in the space Janice had left behind. The golden sunset resumed its rhythm, clinking glasses, muffled chatter, but the night had irrevocably changed, and Janice, now vanishing into the shadows of Highway 12, carried the first spark of something fiercer than betrayal. Janice drove away from the Golden Sunset restaurant in her silver 2012 Honda Accord, the engine's hum a steady companion as she navigated the winding roads of Blackstone, Georgia, under the deepening night of October 19, 2018. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of pine trees and the occasional flicker of a deer's eyes along Highway 12, but her mind drifted far from the present, retreating into the echoes of a decade past. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles pressing against her skin as the memory of her first meeting with Caleb surfaced, vivid as if it had happened yesterday. It was June 7, 2008, a sweltering afternoon when she'd walked into his cramped auto shop on Elm Street, her heels clicking against the oil-stained concrete. At 24, she'd been a junior accountant at Harper & Sons, a small firm downtown, her days filled with spreadsheets and coffee runs. Caleb, then 26, had stood behind the counter, his hands smudged with grease, his hazel eyes catching hers as he flashed a crooked smile. He'd been working on a beat-up Ford pickup, sweat beading on his forehead, and she'd come to settle an invoice for her boss's car repair. Their conversation stretched beyond the transaction, his dreams of owning a chain of shops, her quiet ambition to escape the monotony of her job, and by the end of the week, he'd asked her to dinner at a diner 2 blocks away. The road curved and Janice's thoughts shifted to the early years of their marriage, sealed on October 19, 2008, exactly 10 years ago to the day. She'd worn a simple white dress in the backyard of her father's modest ranch house, the ceremony small but warm, with 30 guests under a rented tent. Caleb had promised her the world, his voice steady as he vowed to build something lasting. Her father, Leonard, a retired attorney with a sharp mind and failing lungs, had pulled her aside that day, his hands trembling from years of chain-smoking. At 62, he'd seen enough of life to distrust easy charm, and he'd insisted on a prenuptial agreement, a precaution Caleb had laughed off but signed without reading closely. Leonard had structured it carefully, transferring control of half their future assets to Janice in the event of a divorce, a safeguard rooted in his belief that love didn't guarantee loyalty. The Accord's tires hummed over a bridge spanning the Little Oconee River, its waters glinting faintly under the moon, and Janice recalled the slow climb of Wilson & Sons, the auto repair empire they'd forged together. By 2012, the first shop had doubled in size and she'd quit her job to manage the books from home, her nights blurring into columns of numbers while Caleb charmed clients and expanded to 3 locations across Blackstone. She'd been the invisible backbone, balancing budgets and securing loans like the $50,000 credit line from First Georgia Bank in 2013 that turned their dream into a network spanning 5 shops by 2016. Caleb basked in the spotlight, his name on every sign, while Janice faded into the background, content to let him shine so long as the life they built held steady. The betrayal at the restaurant gnawed at her now, pulling her deeper into the past, to a moment 2 years ago, August 14, 2016, when she'd found a crumpled receipt in his jacket pocket for a hotel room in Savannah 3 hours away. He claimed it was a business trip, his voice smooth as he kissed her forehead, and she'd swallowed the doubt, blaming exhaustion from her 16-hour days. Another memory flickered. January 9, 2018, when she'd told him she was pregnant, her hands shaking as she held the test in their kitchen. He'd hugged her, his grin wide, but his eyes had darted away, a shadow passing over his joy. She'd dismissed it then, chalking it up to nerves about fatherhood, but now it stung with new meaning. The house loomed ahead, a 2-story brick colonial on Maple Lane, its porch light glowing as she pulled into the driveway at 8:37. She killed the engine, the silence pressing in as she sat for a moment, her breath fogging the windshield in the cooling night. Inside, the living room was dim, the furniture unchanged since they'd bought the place in 2011, beige sofa, oak coffee table, a framed photo of their wedding day tilted slightly on the mantel. She dropped her purse by the door, her footsteps heavy as she crossed to the small office tucked behind the stairs. The room smelled of dust and old paper, its desk cluttered with files she'd meant to organize after the baby came. She knelt by the safe in the corner, a squat metal box Leonard had installed before his death in 2014, its combination her birth date, March 3, 1984. The lock clicked open and she pulled out a leather folder, its edges worn from years untouched. Inside lay the prenuptial agreement, its pages yellowing but intact, alongside bank statements she'd printed 3 months ago, July 20, 2018, when she'd first noticed irregularities in the company accounts. Caleb had been siphoning funds, small amounts at first, then larger sums, a pattern she'd tracked in secret after hiring a private investigator on August 1. She spread the documents across the desk, her hands steady despite the ache in her chest, the weight of her unborn child grounding her as the past and present collided in the quiet house. The clock struck 9, and Janice sat back, her eyes tracing the lines of her father's handwriting, his foresight now her shield against the man she'd once loved. The morning of Saturday, October 20th, 2018, dawned gray and heavy over Blackstone, Georgia, the sky thick with clouds that mirrored the storm brewing in Janice Wilson's heart. She awoke at 6:15 in the guest bedroom of her Maple Lane home, having avoided the master suite she'd once shared with Caleb, its king-size bed now a relic of a life unraveling. Her 6-month pregnant belly ached faintly as she rose, the weight of the child within a quiet reminder of stakes higher than her own pain. She showered quickly, the hot water doing little to ease the tension in her shoulders, and dressed in a navy blouse and black slacks, her attire chosen for authority rather than comfort. By 7:30, she sat at the kitchen table, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug, the documents from the safe spread before her like a map of betrayal. The prenuptial agreement, signed on October 18, 2008, glowed with her father's foresight, granting her half of all marital assets Caleb had underestimated in his arrogance. The bank statements, pulled on July 20, 2018, showed withdrawals totaling $75,000 over 3 months, funneled into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, a scheme she'd uncovered with the help of a private investigator named Roy Carter, hired on August 1. She traced a finger over a photo Roy had delivered on September 10, a grainy shot of Caleb meeting a slick-haired man in a Savannah diner, the timestamp marking August 22, 2018. Her plan crystallized overnight, and at 8:45 she sent Caleb a text from her reclaimed phone, requesting a meeting at their shared office downtown at 10 sharp to discuss the divorce. She arrived at the Wilson & Sons headquarters on Main Street by 9:30, parking her Honda Accord in the lot behind the 2-story brick building, its sign weathered but proud above the entrance. The office sat above the flagship repair shop, its windows overlooking a row of garages where mechanics in blue coveralls worked on a pickup truck and a sedan. Janice climbed the stairs, her steps deliberate despite the twinge in her lower back, and unlocked the office door with a key she hadn't used in months. The space smelled of motor oil and stale coffee, its walls lined with framed certificates of the business's growth since 2012. 5 shops now, a legacy she'd built in the shadows. She settled at the oak desk Caleb had claimed as his own, its surface cluttered with invoices and a half-empty whiskey bottle, a detail that stung more than it should have. She arranged the prenup, bank records, and Roy's photos in neat stacks, her hands steady as she prepared for the confrontation. At 10:05, the door swung open and Caleb strode in, his boots thudding against the hardwood floor, his navy jacket slung over one shoulder. Ashley followed close behind, her blonde hair pulled into a high ponytail, her green sweater swapped for a pink cardigan that clashed with her smug demeanor. She was 25, Janice guessed, her youth a sharp contrast to the exhaustion etched into Janice's own face. Caleb stopped short of the desk, his 6-foot frame looming as he crossed his arms, his hazel eyes narrowing at the sight of the papers. Ashley perched on the arm of a leather chair, her hand brushing Caleb's elbow, a silent claim that faltered when Janice began. She slid the prenuptial agreement across the desk first, its pages rustling as Caleb snatched it up, his brow furrowing as he skimmed the clauses he dismissed a decade ago. The document, dated October 18, 2008, outlined her legal right to half the company's assets, valued at over $2 million by 2018, should their marriage dissolve. His jaw tightened, but Janice pressed on, revealing the bank statements next. The records showed transfers beginning April 15, 2018, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, escalating to $20,000 by September 30, all routed to an account under a shell company named Southern Horizon Limited. She watched his face pale as she laid out Roy's report detailing 6 months of deceit tracked since April 1. The photos came last August 22 in Savannah, Caleb handing an envelope to the slick-haired man, identified by Roy as a disbarred lawyer named Vincent Poole, known for setting up offshore scams. Ashley shifted uncomfortably, her fingers slipping from Caleb's arm as Janice explained how she'd hired Roy on August 1 after noticing a $10,000 discrepancy in the July accounts. She'd kept silent, gathering evidence, her suspicions confirmed when Roy traced the funds to the Caymans on October 10. Caleb's hands clenched into fists, his breath quickening as the weight of her knowledge sank in. Ashley stood, her eyes darting between the papers and Caleb, her confidence crumbling as she stepped back, distancing herself from the man she'd clung to the night before. Janice rose from the chair, her 6-month belly prominent as she leaned forward, her voice absent but her presence commanding. She pointed to a final document, a letter from her attorney dated October 19, 2018, notifying Caleb that she'd frozen the company accounts at 8 that morning, locking him out of the funds he'd siphoned. His face flushed red, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for a defense, but Janice didn't wait. She gathered the papers into a folder, leaving copies on the desk, and walked past them, her footsteps echoing as she descended the stairs. The garage below hummed with activity, oblivious to the collapse unfolding above, and Janice stepped into the overcast daylight at 10:32, her resolve hardening as Caleb's shouts faded behind her. Ashley lingered in the office, her silhouette visible through the window, her alliance with Caleb fracturing under the truth Janice had unleashed. The afternoon of Saturday, October 20, 2018, bled into evening as Janice Wilson returned to the Wilson & Sons headquarters on Main Street in Blackstone, Georgia. Her silver 2012 Honda Accord rolling into the lot at 5:45 under a sky bruised with gathering dusk. She'd spent the hours since her morning confrontation with Caleb fortifying her position, phone calls to her attorney, a meeting with Roy Carter at a diner on Pine Road at noon, and a visit to First Georgia Bank at 2:30 to confirm the freeze on the company accounts, a move executed at 8 that morning with a court order dated October 19. Her 6-month pregnant belly pressed against the steering wheel as she parked, the ache in her lower back a dull companion to the fire in her chest. She stepped out, the cool air biting at her cheeks, and climbed the stairs to the office once more, this time with purpose etched into every movement. The repair shop below buzzed with its usual rhythm, mechanics clanging tools, the hiss of an air compressor, the faint twang of a country song drifting from a radio, but upstairs, the office stood silent, the air still heavy with the morning's fallout. Janice had called an emergency meeting at 6, summoning the 5 key employees who'd anchored the business since its expansion in 2012. Tom Grady, the grizzled shop manager, Lena Hayes, the parts supplier liaison, Miguel Ortiz, the lead mechanic, Sarah Kim, the customer service head, and Derek Poole, the fleet coordinator. They arrived one by one, their footsteps echoing up the stairwell, Tom at 5:50, his boots scuffed from 30 years in the trade, Lena at 5:55, her gray braids swinging as she carried a thermos of tea, Miguel at 5:58. Wiping grease from his hands with a rag, Sarah at 6 on the dot, her clipboard tucked under her arm, and Derek at 6:02, his wiry frame tense with curiosity. They gathered around the oak desk where Janice sat, the same desk Caleb had lorded over, its whiskey bottle now replaced by a stack of folders she'd prepared with Roy's help. The room smelled of motor oil and old wood, the fluorescent lights casting stark shadows across their faces as Janice began. She laid out the prenuptial agreement first, its pages dated October 18, 2008, proving her legal claim to half the company's assets, over $2 million by 2018's valuation. Then came the bank statements, pulled on July 20, showing $75,000 siphoned since April 15, a scheme uncovered by Roy Carter's investigation launched August 1. She flipped open Roy's report, pointing to photos from August 22, Caleb meeting Vincent Poole in Savannah, a disbarred lawyer tied to offshore scams, and bank records tracing the funds to Southern Horizon Limited in the Cayman Islands, a shell company Caleb had registered on May 10. The employees shifted in their seats, Tom rubbing his stubbled jaw, Lena's thermos pausing midair, Miguel crossing his arms, Sarah's pen hovering over her clipboard, Derek's eyes narrowing as the scope of Caleb's betrayal sank in. Janice explained how she'd frozen the accounts at 8 that morning, preserving the remaining $1.8 million in company funds, and how Caleb's actions had nearly bankrupted the business they'd all built. She declared her intent to take over, her voice absent but her posture unyielding, her 6-month belly a silent testament to the future she was fighting for. The clock struck 6:15 when the door burst open, Caleb storming in with a gust of October wind, his navy jacket wrinkled, his hazel eyes wild with fury. Ashley trailed behind, her pink cardigan askew, her blonde ponytail fraying as she hesitated at the threshold. He stopped short of the desk, his 6-foot frame towering over the seated group, his hands clenched as he demanded the meeting end. Janice rose, her slacks creasing as she faced him, her gaze steady despite the tremor in her legs. She pointed to the folders, the evidence laid bare for all to see, and gestured to the employees, their loyalty shifting palpably toward her. Tom stood first, his 60-year-old frame slow but resolute, followed by Lena, then Miguel, Sarah, and Derek, forming a wall between Caleb and the desk. Caleb's face flushed, his breath ragged as he lunged forward, but Miguel and Derek stepped in, their hands on his shoulders, guiding him back. Janice nodded to the security guard she'd hired at 3 that afternoon, a burly man named Hank, stationed downstairs since 5, who ascended the stairs at 6:20, his uniform crisp, his expression neutral. Hank took Caleb by the arm, his grip firm but calm, and escorted him down the steps, Caleb's protests fading into the shop's noise below. Ashley lingered, her eyes darting between the group and the stairwell, her alliance with Caleb dissolving in the face of his ruin. By 6:25 she slipped out, her heels clicking faintly as she vanished into the parking lot, her taillights disappearing down Main Street by 6:30. Janice turned back to the desk, her breath steadying as she sat once more. She reached for the framed wedding photo, October 19, 2008, its glass cool against her fingers, and tore it in half, the pieces fluttering to the floor. The employees watched in silence, their trust in her cemented as she outlined her next steps, stabilizing the business, reclaiming the stolen funds, and securing a legacy for the child she carried. The clock ticked to 6:40, the shop's clamor softening below, and Janice felt the weight of Caleb's empire, now hers, settle into her hands, its collapse a prelude to her rise. The morning of Saturday, October 27, 2018, broke with a tentative sun piercing the clouds over Blackstone, Georgia, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps on Broad Street where Janice Wilson stood at 8:45. Her 6-month pregnant belly straining against the fabric of a charcoal gray coat she'd chosen for the occasion. A week had passed since the unraveling at Wilson & Sons, 7 days of relentless preparation that had begun the evening of October 20th when she'd torn Caleb's wedding photo in half and claimed the business as her own. She'd spent October 21st through October 23rd locked in meetings with her attorney, Clara Evans, a sharp-eyed woman of 52 who'd known Janice's father, Leonard, in his legal heyday. Their sessions held in Clara's cluttered office above a bakery on Oak Avenue, the air thick with the scent of cinnamon and ink. By October 24th, Clara had filed an emergency motion with the Blackstone County Court, citing the prenuptial agreement from October 18, 2008, and the evidence of Caleb's embezzlement. $75,000 siphoned since April 15, tracked by Roy Carter's investigation launched August 1st. Janice had met Roy again on October 22 at noon, handing over the final bank statements printed October 20th, confirming the freeze on the company accounts at 8 that morning, a move that preserved $1.8 million in assets. The courthouse loomed ahead, a 3-story brick building with chipped white columns, its clock tower reading 8:50 as Janice ascended the steps, her black flats scuffing the worn stone, her breath visible in the crisp fall air. Inside, the courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper, its pews half-filled with locals awaiting minor hearings, their murmurs a low hum as Janice took her seat at the plaintiff's table at 9:05. Clara joined her, her briefcase stuffed with folders, the prenup, Roy's photos from August 22 of Caleb meeting Vincent Poole in Savannah, bank records, and a forensic audit completed October 25 by an independent firm Clara had hired on October 21, costing Janice $5,000 but worth every penny. Caleb arrived at 9:10, his navy jacket swapped for a rumpled gray suit, his hazel eyes bloodshot, his 6-foot frame slouched as he sat beside his attorney, a wiry man named Paul Decker, 45, with a reputation for defending lost causes. Ashley was nowhere in sight, her absence noted by Janice as the bailiff called the room to order at 9:15, Judge Margaret Holt presiding, a stern woman of 63 whose silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The hearing began at 9:20, Clara presenting the prenup first, its clauses clear. Janice owned half of Wilson & Sons, valued at $2 million by October 2018. A right triggered by Caleb's filing for divorce on October 22, a desperate move he'd made after the office showdown. She laid out the embezzlement next, $75,000 diverted to Southern Horizon Limited in the Cayman Islands, a shell company registered May 10. With transactions escalating from $5,000 in April to $20,000 by September 30, all documented in the audit. Roy's photos sealed the case, the August 22 image of Caleb and Vincent Poole projected on a screen at 9:35, the timestamp irrefutable. Paul Decker countered at 9:40, his argument thin, claiming Caleb's actions were business restructuring, but Judge Holt's frown deepened as Clara presented the frozen accounts, locked at 8 on October 20, and a letter from First Georgia Bank dated October 24 confirming Janice's authority as co-owner. The gavel fell at 10:05, Judge Holt ruling in Janice's favor. The prenup held, the company was hers, and Caleb's personal assets, $50,000 in a checking account opened in 2015, remained his, but the house on Maple Lane, bought in 2011 for $200,000, transferred to Janice, its title secured by Leonard's foresight. Caleb lost everything else, his stake in the business, his reputation, the empire he'd nearly dismantled. He rose at 10:10, his face ashen, and approached Janice on the steps outside at 10:15, his hands shoved in his pockets, his breath ragged as he pleaded for a second chance, his voice lost to the wind as she turned away, descending to her accord by 10:20. She drove to the office on Main Street, arriving at 10:45, the shop below alive with the clang of tools, the employees, Tom, Lena, Miguel, Sarah, Derek, nodding in quiet respect as she entered. She settled at the desk, the torn wedding photo gone, replaced by a blank notepad, and stared out the window at the sun climbing higher, its light spilling over Blackstone's rooftops. By 6 that evening, she sat in the living room of the Maple Lane house, the beige sofa creaking under her weight, the oak coffee table bare save for a mug of chamomile tea brought by Lila Hayes, her old friend and the parts supplier liaison, who'd arrived at 5:30 with a grocery bag and a promise to stay. Lila, 41, her gray braid undone, sat across from Janice, her presence a balm after the week's chaos. The clock struck 6:30, the room dimming as dusk settled, and Janice rested a hand on her belly, feeling the faint kick of her child, a new dawn breaking within her as Caleb's world crumbled beyond the walls she'd reclaimed. 3 months had passed since the courtroom victory on October 27, 2018, and by January 27, 2019, Janice Wilson stood in the nursery of her Maple Lane home in Blackstone, Georgia, cradling her newborn son, Miles, born on January 15 at 7 pounds, 3 ounces, his name a tribute to her father, Leonard, whose foresight had secured her future. The room glowed with soft morning light filtering through pale blue curtains she'd hung on January 20th. The crib, a sturdy oak piece bought on December 10th for $150, nestled against the wall, its blanket embroidered with stars by Lila Hayes, who'd gifted it on January 16th, the day after Miles's birth. Janice, now 34, wore a loose gray sweater and leggings, her body still adjusting from the delivery at Blackstone General Hospital where she'd labored for 12 hours starting at 6 on January 14th. Her contractions sharp but her resolve sharper, Lila by her side as the clock ticked past midnight. The hospital stay lasted 2 days, discharging her on January 17th with Miles bundled in a white onesie, his tiny fists clenched as she drove him home in the silver 2012 Honda Accord at 10:30 that morning. The car seat a $50 find from a thrift store on December 15th. The weeks since October had transformed Wilson & Sons, the auto repair empire Janice had wrested from Caleb's grasp, its 5 shops humming under her leadership by January 27th, their revenue climbing 10% since November 1st. When she'd implemented new policies, transparent accounting, employee bonuses, and a focus on customer loyalty, announced at a staff meeting on October 30th, attended by Tom, Lena, Miguel, Sarah, and Derek in the Main Street office at 6 that evening. She'd hired a new manager, Eric Tate, 38, on November 10th, his resume boasting 15 years at a Savannah dealership, his steady hand easing the transition as Janice balanced motherhood and business. His first day marked by a handshake at 9 on November 12th. The house on Maple Lane, secured by the prenup ruling on October 27th, stood as her fortress, its brick exterior unchanged since 2011, but inside, she'd cleared Caleb's traces, his boots gone by November 5th. His recliner sold for $20 on November 7th, the wedding photos frame repurposed for a snapshot of Miles taken January 18th, his dark eyes mirroring hers. Caleb had faded from Blackstone by January 27th, retreating to a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side, rented November 15th for $500 a month, his $50,000 savings dwindling as he avoided the repair shops. His once loud presence reduced to whispers among locals at the Golden Sunset, last spotted there on December 20th nursing a beer at 8. Janice had launched a charity fund on December 1st, the Miles Ahead Foundation, seeded with $10,000 from company profits, its mission to support single mothers with car repairs and job training. Its first grant awarded January 10th to a 22-year-old named Keisha Brown who'd started as a receptionist at the flagship shop on January 15th. Her gratitude evident in the thank you note pinned to Janice's office corkboard by January 20th. Lila had become her anchor, moving into the guest room on November 1st after selling her own place on October 31st for $90,000, her gray braid a constant as she cooked dinners, chicken stew on January 25th at 6:30. And rocked Miles to sleep by 7 each night, freeing Janice to review spreadsheets emailed by Eric at 8. The office on Main Street, visited by Janice on January 26th at 10, reflected her reign, the oak desk now hers, its whiskey bottle replaced by a potted fern bought December 5th for $15. The walls adorned with employee photos from a holiday party on December 20th, 30 staffers grinning under string lights strung by Sarah at 5 that evening. By January 27th, the business stood at $2.1 million in value, up from $1.8 million on October 20th. The stolen $75,000 recovered by Clara Evans via a settlement signed by Caleb on November 20th, his signature shaky on the document delivered to Janice's doorstep at 9 that morning. That evening, at 6:45, Janice stood on the back porch, the air crisp with winter's end, Miles swaddled in a blanket against her chest, his breath warm on her neck as she watched the sun dip below the pines lining Highway 12, its glow painting the sky orange by 7. Lila joined her at 6:50, a mug of tea in hand, her presence unspoken but vital, their silhouettes framed against the dusk as the town settled into Sunday quiet. Janice's hand rested on Miles's back, feeling his heartbeat, a rhythm tying her to a legacy rebuilt, not just the shops, but a life carved from betrayal's ashes, its foundation laid by Leonard's prenup on October 18, 2008, and cemented by her own hands over 10 years. The clock inside chimed 7, the nursery's glow beckoning, and Janice stepped back into the house, her gaze lingering on the horizon, the weight of Caleb's fall a distant echo beneath the promise of Miles's future. Her empire now a beacon for those she'd vowed to lift with her.